the three early inspirations for literature. We talked about that how the literature of Romanticism was strongly and stoutly inspired by the American Revolution and then the French Revolution strongly, and we have some impact of this glorious revolution on the poetry or on the literature of American too. And I hope so that I have been gone through only 1.5 page, and it took me almost 1 hour or more than 1 hour to explain the things. And then you have just, I think I would say that shrunk every information into a little sentences that you have told me today. So we've talked about that how American Revolution was all about the emancipation from, not from the slavery, but it was also the emancipation or freedom from the British rule. It was the emancipation in art and literature. It was the emancipation in every section and aspects of life. And with that inspiration, romantics were able to do something of their own that is not bound and that is not restricted, that is not hurdled, that is not, I would say, limited. So that is the reason. Then French Revolution was also an early inspiration for the Romantic poets and writers. So they also took the liberty to talk about their selves because it was a decision of a subject, of a single subject, of an individual subject. It was a decision of, I would say, of the common man, of an individual man. So they have decided to overturn the throne, to overturn the elite class, or they have actually decided to eliminate the differences between and among the classes, and they did so. So this was another inspiration that the common people, you know, that the Romantic age is full of the poets who are actually the commoners. Commoner means in a sense that they are, like most of them, they are the villagers. They are the realistic writers and poets. They know and understand the life of the villages. They know and understand the life of the nature, the real life of nature. So we can say that how they talk about the concept of nature, how they talk about, because they are associating the components of the nature with the life of the people. And this is, I would say, that with their personal experiences, and this is what they do with their, I would say, with their personal sentiments and emotions. So this is what they do, and they were also succeeded. And then English, this Romantic age became one of the most important age in the history of English literature. Then we've talked about also, yes, the French slogan liberty, equality, and fraternity, that how it also motivated the people, motivated the writers and the poets of Romanticism to write something. I would say in the form of liberal art. They have written something that could not match the previous writing styles of the people, but they have coined their own new styles. They have coined their own models, and they were succeeded into that, and that it became, I would say, another most inspirational age for the upcoming ages. And this was all about these early inspirations. So, what are the main features and the characteristics of the age? And we will see that what are the things that we are going to discuss, and what are the things that we will be taking as a helping material from these features and characteristics to understand the poetry of the Romantic age. Okay, so you have to focus one by one or every single point so you can understand that what Romantic poetry can be all about. So first of all, you just need to develop your context and background, and then when you will be studying Romantic poetry, so everything will be out of that background or out of that knowledge that you will be getting today. Central features of Romanticism include an emphasis on emotional and imaginative spontaneity. This is the first thing. What is the spontaneity and what is the emphasis on emotional and imaginative spontaneity? You know that emphasis on emotional and imaginative or creativity. Romantic poets, they focused and stressed and emphasized on the concept because the emotional or the emotion or the sentiments, they belong to the inner selves of the people. And you know that when the inner self is involved in any of the writing or piece of writing, then that thing looks natural, that thing looks realistic, because that poetry, poem, or piece of art possesses a section of the life into that poetry or into that piece of art. And that section of life directly comes from the lives of the people. So that is the reason we can say that they have focused the emotions, they have focused the imaginative creativity, or they have focused, I would say, the personal inclusion of the experiences into their poetry, so that because when someone reads any piece of art or any piece of literature, they really understand that this is all about the emotional feelings, not only the emotional feelings of the writer but of of their selves too. So that is the reason that this is all about the emotional feelings, and on the other side, if it is emotional, it is related to the human beings. If it is related to the human being, it is related to the reality. So reality has been given a new form, but with subjective truth or subjective reality. So this is the word that is notable: subjective truth or subjective reality. What is subjective truth and subjective reality? Writers tend to know about that if something exists in this world, if something exists in this, I would say, in any particular era or everywhere, that thing, according to writer, is reality. No matter that whether that thing is also a phenomena of reality for the other poets and for the other writers or not. This is not the matter. Like, if I see any piece of reality or any truth in one thing or in one object or in one subject, it is not the same that like you will be finding the same truth, the same reality in that subject or in that person or in that event. Might be your subjective reality or your the definition of your subjective reality would be different from mine. It can be. So that is subjective reality, and that is the major focus of the romantic poets and writers, because they think so. They think so that whatever we are going to write about, this is based on our experience, this is based on our subjective knowledge, subjective experience, and if this is subjective reality or subjective truth, then it doesn't matter that whether it is reality and truth for the other people or not. Okay, so that is subjective reality and subjective truth. So subjective reality and subjective truth based on the emotion and based on the imaginative spontaneity. So that is, I would say, that the spontaneity of any literature, of literary writer, of any poet. And spontaneity is a process actually. It is a process in which there are certain changes occur. Okay, so that is a imaginative process, because when you are thinking about anything, you know that emotions and sentiments, they do not remain the static. They are all the time changes. They are all the time changing. So that is the imaginative spontaneity, because your imagination does not remain static. It changes with the, even though in every second it changes. So Focus is the first point is the focus is on the emphasis and emphasis on the emotional and imaginative spontaneity. That writer focused more on the emotions, the sentiments, and the subjective truth and the reality more than the other things of the society. The importance of self-expression and individual feeling, and it is also called this age, this mode of romanticism, that they gave importance to self-expression. And you know that self-expression is another important feature in the romantic age because they were able to express themselves. Otherwise, writers, they did not have anything to say about themselves. Like they have to talk about, they have to share the information based on people's experiences, but they have very less knowledge of themselves into any poetry or into any piece of literature. So they focused and they gave the importance to self-expression, like that self-expression must be involved. And let me tell you one thing, that self-expression gives another way to literary competency, because your self-expression is deciding that how much knowledge you have about your subject, and how you're going to express it, how you're going to define it, how you're going to explain it, how you're going to justify it for the people, so that the people may believe on your subjective argument, whether that is true or not. So that is the reason I would say that the individual feeling, like what I think or what I express about the people or about my feelings, whatever it is. So you know that in the previous ages, nature has not been depicted as the most realistic phenomenon as it is in the age of romanticism, because people cannot find any kind of reality, I would say. People cannot find any kind of living phenomenons in the components of the nature or in the presence of the nature. But now you see that the romantic poets, they gave the life to the natural components. They gave the life to the natural components by writing on them, by including them as the subjects. So they have, I would say, breathed a new life into them, all the subjects of the nature, because they are the real subjects to talk about or to write about. And this is not true, that this is not, I would say, that they have only talked about only the nature. They have also talked about themselves. Nature is only a subject, only a subject. There can be many other subjects, like poor people's depiction or representation is also a subject. Socio-political matters and affairs can also be a subject. Okay, so this is nature is only a subject for the romantic poets, for the romantic writers. Okay, then we have romantic poetry is one of the heart and the emotions, exploring the truth of the imagination rather than scientific truth. So now people, many people, like in the form of critics, they were against this concept of romanticism, that how you can call nature or how you can call anything or everything that is based on the imagination as truth. How you can say that okay, this thing is also reality, this thing is also truth. But whether your argument is already on based on the imagination, how you can say that everything is truth? So people were actually after this type of concept, that you may not call everything real or everything as a reality. But they have explained, the romantic poets, they have explained this. They have explained that it is not the scientific truth, but it is the truth of the imagination. And what is the truth of imagination? That is based on your creativity. As I have already told that, like if you can obey the people, worship the religion, if you are free in your independent thoughts and independent ideas, then you are not, I would say, limited with the concept of science, that it is all only science that you must follow. You can also follow your imagination. It means that without the intrusion of the science, you can write something and you can prove that something as truth or reality as well. So there is no need to, I would say, to compare the truth of imagination with the scientific truth, because scientific truth is, you know, that we have made the numbers, we have made the equations, we have solved the problems, we have, I would say that, made these numericals too. Like if I say that 2 plus 2 is equal to 5, so if the first idea would have been like, okay, 2 plus 2 is equal to 5, and then every person would have followed in the same way, I think that that is the scientific truth and knowledge that everyone would have followed till now. But it did not happen in the same way. People said, okay, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, and everybody believed that. So I think that there was only one person. This, even though scientific knowledge and truth also came from one person. That is the idea of one person. Even though the laws of nature, the laws of nature, the scientific truths, the scientific inventions, they also come from one people, one individual. If we can accept that type of knowledge, so we also accept this type of knowledge that is also called the truth of imagination in the same case. Then the I voice is central. It is the poet's perceptions and feelings that matter. So now I, like when I talk about I, it talks about my feelings, my emotions. Because I belongs to subject. I belongs to the subject. I belongs to the individual. So I am the individual. I. I'm not talking about third person narration. I'm talking about first person narration. Third person narration is like he thinks, she thinks, king thinks. No, I'm talking about I think. This is the first person narration. So I would say that with I, you can talk about anything that you like, because you are talking, you are argumenting with your perception, not someone else's perception, because the someone else's perception will be called third person narration, and that will be that you are forced to follow that person's ideas, that person's perception in every matter. But why you will do that if you can also include your opinions, your perceptions in any art of or in any piece of literature? So why you cannot do that? You can also talk about your subjective knowledge, your individual knowledge into poetry or into literature. Okay, then an almost religious response to nature. They were concerned that nature should not just be seen scientifically, but as a living force. So, this is what we are talking about all the time. That they have seen and observed the nature as a living phenomena, not as a scientific knowledge. What scientific? Now you have to just focus on this thing attentively. Okay, what science does, science only explains that what happens in this world. Like science explains, okay, what sun does, science explains what moon does, how this earth revolves, how the planets revolve, how this universe works and functions. So this is what science tells. On the other side, what the poets tell about the nature. So that scientific knowledge is about the nature is that how this all functions. But on the other side, the romantic poets or the poets of nature tell how this they actually explain every function of this universe. They beautify every component of nature with their understanding, and they explain the same. Like if the scientists they talk about, okay, this is how the earth revolves, how this thing functions, how this planet functions, how the stars are functioning. They are also explaining about, I would say, with their scientific knowledge about the galaxy, about the world. On the other side, what does the poet do? The poet also tries to explain the functions, but with an imaginative or with a creative language, with an imaginative and creative language. And they are praising, they are all the time appreciating the work of the God in the nature. You see that how the poets and the writers they explain the beautiful creation of the God in beautiful words, in beautiful language. And now you can see that which thing is more important for the people: the scientific knowledge in which they only explain what is already there, or the other people who actually try to explain the things with a beautification of the language, with a with an aesthetics of the language. It means the people who explain with aesthetic knowledge the components of the God, they are praising and appreciating the components of the God, the nature, in in beautiful language. So they are most important people, not the people on the other side, the scientific. They have the scientific knowledge. This is not my view. This is their view. And on the other side, people who try to explain everything with science, they find reason in everything. And if they find reason, then they call it science. If they do not find reason, then they do not call it science. But what about the things that are not called science? Because that is the domain of the science. Because if science finds it reasonable, if science finds it logical, then science accepts it. But on the other side, if we talk about arts and social sciences, or if we talk about literature, if literature is not about logic, it is not about rationality or scientific knowledge, then why literature must be finding the logic in the things? There is no need. There is no need that literature will be finding logic and rationality in the subjects, in the nature, in anything. There is no logic. So that is the reason we can say that nature has been dealt as a living phenomenon for the first time in the age of romanticism, as a living phenomenon. It seems that nature talks to human being. If nature tries to talk to human being, it means that God tries to talk with the human being. So this is what the poets of romantic say about the scientific knowledge or about the nature. Okay, then they said that either made by a creator or as in some way divine, to be neglected at mankind's peril. So we say that science, on the other side, we see that literature or the creativity, if they both, nature is created and there are only two aspects, I would say. Nature is one, but there are two aspects. The one is science, the other is literature. And science is doing its own work, literature is doing its own work. And I have no objection that science must be have any doubt on the understanding of the poets, that why you explain the nature like this. Because people do not need all the time the scientific knowledge. They need some pleasurable language, they need some good language, they need some relaxation, they need some I would say that reliefs in the form of nature, in the form of literature. So that is the reason they do so. Okay, it means that uh, as in some we can say that nature is divine. On the other side, the scientific knowledge that we can also say about the nature, it is also good. But to be neglected at humans, if you the human people neglect both of them, this is the dangerous situation, I would say. This is dangerous situation, so you cannot do neither of it. So you have to take one, that is nature, and you have to take science, that is also about the nature. So the concepts are different, but they talk about the same subject, that is the nature. Some of them were no longer Christian in their beliefs. Shelley was an atheist, and for a while Wordsworth was a pantheist, and much of their poetry celebrated the beauty of nature. So this is the reason. Like as I've already told, that there can be one subject, that is nature, but many angles to talk about it. As you see that P.B. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, he was a romantic, but he was an atheist. He was a non-believer. He does not believe on God because he thinks that there is no God. And what is the reason behind? The reason behind of Shelley's not acceptance of the God was that he was having a company. He was having a company of the people, like his wife, his wife Mary Shelley. She was also an atheist. On the other side, Mr. Harvey, who was also an atheist. Then Mr. William, he was also an atheist, and they all were the people who actually were believing that God cannot create human being, but the human beings can also do. Can human beings can also create the human beings. And if you know about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a best-selling novel in the Romantic age, you in the late Romantic age, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So you will come to know about that Mary Shelley. She was the wife of Shelley, P.B. Shelley, and they both were busy, even though, to create the life, to create the life from the dead bodies, from the dead people. So they have to, like in the Frankenstein, how she explains that she has to collect the bodies, the different bodies from the grave, and she pieced them all, the body parts, in together, and they were sewed, all the body parts, they were sewed, and then with the uh, I would say with the electric shocks, with the electric shocks, that body was given the life. And it is said at that time, the people, she explains that there were some people who actually who were given the life with those, with that electricity. It means that this is their concept, and this concept is totally against the God, because God created human beings, and Shelley thinks no, man can also create human being. So he was an atheist, I would say, non-believer of God. And then on the other side, we see that Wordsworth is a pantheist, because the belief of pantheism is, this is also the belief, the pantheism is a belief in which you, I would say, that accept, or you feel that there is God in every shape, in every form. This is also the belief of the Indian people, because they also feel so, that there is God in everything, in every shape, in birds, in insects, in even though in animals, even though in trees. So that is the concept of pantheism. It means that they are the believers of the God. They are believing gods that is found in more than 33 million shapes. 33 million shapes. That is the concept of I would say that concept of pantheism according to the Indians or Hindus. On the other side, I would say that Wordsworth, he was also a pantheist because he believed that God is in everything. God is in everything. This is also the same belief of pantheism of the Hindus. So much of their poetry celebrated the beauty of nature. So this is the reason that we find Wordsworth's poetry is all about the nature, because he finds that in every component of nature, there is God. So that is he was the true believer of God, I would say, because he tries to explain the God or the godly powers with the nature, with the different angles and components of nature. So this is all about Wordsworth. And much of their poetry celebrated the beauty of nature or protested the ugliness of the growing industrialization of the centuries. The factories, the machines, the slum conditions, pollution, and so on. And it means that he was not a good admirer of industrialization, because you know, as I've already told, that new industries were planted at that time. You know that how the industries, the factories, the chimneys full of smokes, they are jeopardizing the life of the people. They are, you see that how they are actually uh, creating the problems for the humanity, for the nature, for the animals, and for the environment. And this is not a, I would say that they are uh, making or creating the problems for this age, but for the upcoming ages also. Might be at that time, the when the industries were planted, people were not affected, much affected, but you know that a writer and a poet is all the time a foreshadower, because he predicts the future. A true writer all the time predicts the future. Now you can see that industrialization that were planted 200 years ago, now they are actually affecting the lives of the people. And that is the reason that environment is actually affecting the lives of the people. You can take example of coronavirus. It means that he was of the view that nature must not be polluted, must not be corrupted with industrialization, with factories, with machines, with pollution, because nature must remain pure in its pure forms. But you know that at that time, even though people, if they wanted to plant the industries, the new industries in the slum areas, in the village areas, so they had to cut trees at a larger level, and they did so. And now you see that how if the cutting of the trees was turning into industries, and then it was the danger for the lives, for the wildlife, for the birds, for the insects, even though for the human beings too. And if from that era till today, there were, I would say, million and million trees that they were forested from that age to till today. And how it jeopardized the lives of the people, you see that now nature got violent. Nature got violent because you try to tamper with the nature. You try to tamper with the nature with while cutting the trees, while cutting the jungles, by evacuating the lands, and the animals on the other sides. They have, I would say, less space, less shelters, and they definitely will be get violent in that sense, because if they are not having proper space to live, proper shelter to live, so what they are doing, they are attacking human beings because they do not have much to live. So that is the reason that we can say that the celebration of nature he has admired all the time. But on the other side, he was also protesting against the ugliness, the badness, the filthy acts of industrialization and the machines and the factories and the slum conditions, because he thinks so that these are the things that jeopardizing the nature, that that keeping everything at stake or everything at risk. And then a capacity for wonder, and consequently a reverence for the freshness and innocence of the vision of childhood. And another good addition that he has done in his poetry or through his poetry, that was the introduction, or I would say the launching of the childhood innocence, because he talked about the childhood experiences, like when they used to come in the jungle and they used to swing with the branches of the trees. They used to climb the trees, they used to climb the mountains, they used to drink water from the rills, from the streams. So this is all about the childhood experience or about the nostalgia, that how did they spend their past, how did they spend their childhood in the lap of the nature, because that time talks about the innocency of the children. So it is, I would say that the first poet who talked about uh, with this experience, and this experience is only possible if you take this subjectivity to a higher level, to a higher level of imagination. You can never talk about with the scientific approach, with a realistic approach. I would say realistic in the meaning of reasons. So you cannot talk about the nature, because if you haven't seen that nature right now, how it can be a part of your life, even though today. So he has actually given a gateway to the people, that they can also go into their childhood experiences through the poetry, through the imagination, and he was succeeded into that. This is the beauty of, I would say, William Wordsworth. That William Wordsworth has provided a gateway to the people to look and go into their childhood experiences, into their childhood memories, into their childhood nostalgia, and they may stay there for a while, and they can enjoy how they have spent their childhood, and then they can also come back after taking a flight of the events, or after enjoying the childhood experiences. And this is, he has done with a wonder of piece of literature and his poetry. So see the world of the romantics attitude to childhood. So this is another thing, another addition. Emphasis on the imagination as a positive and creative faculty. Are you people listening?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good. Because I have watched a couple of videos in which the students, they are just muting their mics, and after that sometimes they are asleep, sometimes the female, they are actually going into kitchen. So emphasis on the imagination as a positive and creative faculty. So now you see that imagination, fancy and imagination. Fancy is all about, like, you see at something, you admire it, you like it, and this is the one thing that you will say, fancy thing. On the other side, imagination is all the time a creative phenomenon. This is the difference, main difference between imagination and fancy. Fancy is like a daydream, especially the dawn dream, like when you are actually awake and you are half asleep, you are thinking, okay, uh, I think that I must not go to university, I must not go to work today. I think that I can sleep, and I'll be then sending a message to my employer that I could not come due to this reason and due to that reason. So you are actually making, I would say that thousand and thousand excuses while you are half asleep, and you think that everything is possible. When you actually suddenly woke up and you think, no, I have to go, otherwise the boss is going to kill me, and then you are in the reality, in the real sense. And this happens with everyone, that we are such of the time we are I would say that fantasized with this idea. So fantasy is all about, I would say, like a daydreaming that seems everything is possible. But on the other side, imagination is all about creativity. Like you create something with your focused learning, with your focused, I would say, attention. And it was the emphasis on imagination, not fancy, I would say. So imagination, because imagination creates something. It creates positive faculty and constructive faculties in the society. You know that how nature is now, nature is considered now as a positive and a constructive phenomena, because nature is benefiting million and million people around the world, because nature is the one that gives you solace, that gives you console, that gives you relaxation all the time. When we are moving towards the northern areas, especially Murray and all the other areas, we feel relaxed. We feel, yeah, this is the true nature, and we feel that okay, we must live a couple of days more into the lap of the nature, because you are out of worries, you are out of I would say that issue, you're anxious and everything else. So that is the reason that we can say that if you are creating something, it is all the time positive. Why it is positive? Because nature is all about the nature, and nature is all about the truth, and that truth is all about the God. So if you create something from or out of it, it must be constructive, it must be positive. There is nothing that we can say that it is negative. So nature is positive. And then an interest in the primitive forms of art, for instance, in the work of early poets like bards, because they have been called as bards, in ancient ballads and folk songs. So, as I've already told, that they were not the people who actually or who try entirely culminated the previous ages and previous ideals. No, they did not culminate it. They actually uh, they have taken some of the inspirations, the positive inspirations from the old forms of literature, from even though the old poets. They did not actually rejected all of them. They have actually some of the people, some of the primitive forms of art and literature that they try to uh, include in their forms of the poetries. Like you can say that even though the lyrical ballad itself is a form, it is an ancient form, because ballad was a type of form in which when someone is actually reading the ballads, saying the ballads, and on the other side people are dancing on the ballad. So this is a type of ballad, like you are saying the ballads, narrating the ballads, lyrical forms, I would say, the poetry, and then on the other side, the people are dancing on it. So this is the primitive form of ballad. And now you see that people have written ballads, the lyrical ballads, in the very first, I would say, publication of the Romantic poets. And what is that? It is all about the lyrical ballads, the publication of the lyrical ballads by S.T. Coleridge and William Wordsworth. So it means that we have taken something from the primitive forms of literature, and that is the form of ballads. And what is ballad in the poetry? Like they have written the the ideas in a form, in a sequence. When the people read the lines of the poetry, they feel that there is a melodic, a rhythmic form, a metrical form in that poetry. They feel a rhythmic form of poetry in it. And there is, I would say, that it is an organized form of poetry that you will read. It is like that you are dancing and you are enjoying the rhythm of the poetry. So this is how they have taken the concept of ballads from the primitive form of art, and they have included into their poetry. So now the previous ballads, they were all about, the people were narrating the songs, and on the other side the people were dancing on them. But now they have modified the idea of the ancient ballads, What they have done, the Romantic poets, they have actually organized their poetry in a sequence that when you read it, when you study it, it feels like a dance and the music at the same time. And then the folk songs and the ballads. So this is how they have actually modified that primitive idea of the ancient people into their work or into their poetry. Some of the romantics turned back to past times to find inspiration either to the medieval period or to Greek and Roman mythology. So some of them they actually turned their backs to past times because either to the medieval period because sometimes they have been taking some inspiration from the Greek people. Some of them are taking the inspiration from Roman mythology. Some of them were interested in the Gothic in the Gothic type of writings. The Gothic novel is another form of novel. Gothic novel talks about the the horror and the horrific scenes, the horrific scenes or inculcations or happenings or events about any particular subject. So that is about the Gothic poetry or the Gothic novel. And it is concern for the outcasts of the society, trams, beggars, obsessive characters, and the poor and discarded in the Romantic poetry. So now you can see that they haven't left anything unturned. Rather, they have included every little subject in their poetry also, and like an interest in and concern for the outcasts of the society, trams, beggars, obsessive characters, and the poor and disregarded are especially evident in Romantic poetry. So they taken and talked about every little details, even though the people who belong to the poor society, the poor classes, so they were also the subject of the Romantic poetry. An idea of the poet, because the Romantic poetry is all about the poor classes, about the villagers. It is not about the royal classes or the elite classes, and in which only the great people or the rich people or the elite classes and the royal classes are the subject. No, this is all about the simple language. The language is simple, the ideas are simple, without any bombastic vocabulary, without any bombastic ideas. So they are all about the people, sometimes about the farmers, about the peasants, about the workers, about the beggars, about these people specifically. An idea of the poet as a visionary figure with an important role to play as prophet in both political and religious terms. So, again, the same thing, that a poet is like a who can see the visions, who can see the visions like a visionary figure, like who can see the visions. Okay, like he can sense something into the air, he can sense something that this is that is going to happen next, because a writer is all the time a predictable creature. As I've already told, that Wordsworth, if he has talked about, he has rejected the idea of industrialization and factories and these things. So there was a reason behind that these are the things that going to destroy the future of the human being, and they did so. It means that a writer is not only a writer, he's a prophet who can see the visions, who can see the future, who can see beyond the walls, beyond the boundaries, out of the box. He can think out of the box. He has the predictable knowledge about the future or the futuristic studies. So, this is what a poet is, like a prophet. Who were the Romantics? Like, I don't think though this must be making you people angry. Like, who were the Romantics? Because you can see that, okay, from 1 hour and 20 minutes we are studying about the Romantics, we are studying about the Romanticism, and you are saying that who were the Romantics? Definitely you know about. So there are some authors who have been regarded as pre-romantic. And who are those pre-romantic? William Blake. William Blake, a visionary poet who was also an artist and engraver with a particular interest in childhood and a strong hatred for mechanical reason and industrialization. So the first poet is William Blake. So he is also a visionary poet. So every writer, every poet is a visionary. And he, being an artist, being a serious person, serious poet, I would say, because the engraver or the serious poets, they are all the time thinking about or thinking for the interests of the humanity, not for themselves all the time. They were also against. He was also against the mechanical reasons of industrialization, because people have thought that what is science? Science is all about making machineries, making new machines, or shrinking the people, and then they are, you can say, making some gigantic industries and factories, and the labor, the hand labor is actually shrinking. So this is what they believe. And if it happens so, if it happens so, it means this happens because of the science, because science produces new machines, science produces a new, I would say, inventions about the gadgets, about the tools, about the equipments. So they think that it is the science that is destroying the nature, because you know industries and on the other side science, they have a connection with one another. They have a connection to destroy and to spoil the components of the nature, some in some ways. So that is the reason that he was also in the favor of nature, and in the interest of the nature. And his specific area is all about the childhood experiences, that he included his childhood experiences. Then Robert Burns, who worked as a plowman and from laborer, but who had received a good education and was interested in early Scots ballads and folk songs. So he is another writer, another poet, who is also from a poor class, like a son of a farmer, because he was also a plowman and a farmer, so who had received a good education. And this is another good experience that he had, that he got education, and he was then interested in the ballads. So this is his expertise, that he was experienced in Scott ballads, and on the other side he was experienced in folk songs. And one thing, that these ballads and folk songs, these are all sub-genres of orature, like the verbal songs or the verbal communication of anything. It is called orature. Then Walter Scott, another Scott who developed his interest in old tales of border and early European poetry into a career as a poet and novelist. So he is another Scot who has developed his interest in old tales. Again, the same style: old tales, folk tales, and then folklores, then fairy tales, then ballads. These are all subtypes of orature. Orature is that is not in a written form, but in the form of verbal. Okay, when something verbal is actually communicated or transferred from one person to another, that is orature. But the literature on the other side is written form. Then the first generation of romantics is also known as the lake poets, because of their attachment to the Lake District in the northwest of England. So, with from lake, so they have been called as the lake poets, because they were all associated and attached to the Lake District. So that is the reason they are called lake. And who were they? You know that William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge, they are also the contemporaries to one another, because they have written uh, jointly a publication of lyrical ballads around about on 1798, and that was the starting of the Romantic age. So they were also the contemporary and belonging to the same district. Wordsworth, who came from the Lake District and was the leading poet of the group, whose work was especially associated with the centrality of the self and the love of the nature. So these are the two most important themes: the self, and self includes his childhood experiences to his adult age experiences. So this is what he talks about himself. And the love of nature, because he was the admirer of nature, the lover of nature. So he talked about every component of nature as a truth or as a reality. Then Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or S.T. Coleridge, was Wordsworth's closest colleague and collaborator, a powerful intellectual whose work was often influenced by contemporary ideas and science and philosophy. So we can say that Samuel Taylor, he is also another influential colleague and collaborator of William Wordsworth. He was also a contemporary belonging to the same age. Contemporary means belonging to same age. A powerful intellectual. And you know that he was often influenced by contemporary ideas about science and philosophy. So these were the ideas that really appealed him. But on the other side, we can say that he was also an opium addict. An opium addict. He was a, I would say, drug addict, and he has written one of the finest piece, that is Kubla Khan, and you already know about that. Then Robert Southey, a prolific writer of poetry and prose who settled in the Lake District and became a poet laureate in 1813. His work was later mocked by Byron. Then Charles Lamb was a poet. So these are some other, I would say, minor poets. Not, I would say that they are not important poets, but they are some minor poets. But the major poets are Samuel Taylor, Wordsworth, William Blake, Charles Lamb. He was also a poet, but is best known for his essays and literary criticism. A Londoner, he was especially close to Coleridge. Then Thomas D. Kinchey, the youngest member of the group, best known as an essayist and critic who wrote a series of memoirs of the Lake Poets. So he was another important writer and youngest of the member of the group, and he was known for his criticism and for his essays, and he has also written a series of the memoirs belonging to the same district. The second generation of Romantic poets included George Gordon and Lord Byron. Then P.B. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, one of the leading poets. Then John Keats was a London poet, especially known for his odes and sonnets and for his letters, which contain many reflections as poetry and the work of the imagination. So Lord Byron is an important poet. Percy Bysshe Shelley, P.B. Shelley, and John Keats. So these are the important poets of this age, other than William Blake, William Wordsworth, and S.T. Coleridge. The six are the most important poets. So you already know about John Keats. That John Keats, he has written about also the poets. So he about the nature, about the components of the nature, and what was his special area of interest. He was specialized in many things. He was specialized in, I would say, in old models and in old form of literature, because he has included some of the Hellenistic features belonging to Greek era or belonging to Greek culture, Hellenistic features in his poetry. On the other side, he has also talked about the birds. He has talked about, because birds, they also belong to the nature, the component of the nature, like in the form of nightingale, a bird. And he has, I would say, that breathed his life into that nightingale, and he tried to become an escapist for a while. So this is another, I would say, his new uh, idea about this thing. That is the reason he was called an escapist. So escapism or escapist is another idea, because he thinks that we can escape from the reality for a while and we can go into the world of imagination and we can stay over there. So but we have to come back and face the reality also. So this is his idea of escapism, and he was also an escapist. Okay, so these are some of the poets of Romantic age, and you know that these are the poets, and they were named after their contribution in literature, specifically in the age of Romanticism, and some of them are called pre-Romantic poets. Some of them are called lake poets. Some of them are called post-Romantic or pre-Victorian poets. So they all have their own tastes, they all have their own writings, they all have their own agendas, all have their own, I would say, constructivity in literature, creativity in literature. But we have to explore every single poet and writer of this age, that what specifically they talk about, what are the events they have talked about, what are the I would say, uh, how they have encapsulated the lives of the people, and in which terms they have represented the people, and what is the source of their imagination to talk about the people. And on the other side, we will see that what type of writing style they have followed, and how they have represented the people in their own styles. Some of them they have taken the help and assistance of the nature, some of them they have taken the assistance of the old and primitive models and old style of writing. So collectively we can say that they have taken their different subjects, but on the other side, on a single page, or I would say at a single platform, they were all the same. They were the poet of Romanticism, and they followed the imagination of truth in every matter, in every I would say section of life. And that is the speciality of the Romantic poets, other than anything that they have encountered and that they have faced. So this is all about the age of Romanticism. This is all about the explanation of the about a single brief introduction, or brief, I would say, knowledge about their writings, about their selves, and how their style was all about. And now, in the next lecture, we are going to talk about these 6 or 7 writers, the writers of this age, and we are going to discuss their one piece of important one piece of their uh, literary art. Like it can be any poem, it can be any essay, it can be anything that they have written differently. And now, so that we must know, we may have a better understanding, a deep understanding about their imagination, about their subjective truth, their subjective reality, what is all about. Okay, so I'll be taking every single a piece of poetry or any piece of art of theirs to include in the upcoming lecture, so that we can understand easily, and that what they have talked about actually, what we have studied, whether those things match with the poems, or with the poetry, or with the artistry of these writers or not. So this is what we are going to do in the next lecture. So till now, whatever we have discussed, if you are satisfied with everything that we have talked about, it is fine. But if you have any questions about anything, then you may ask right now. But we are done with our lecture.